Hi there. Welcome and thank you for joining me live. I have today Tara McCann, and she's a menstrual health coach who supports women to use the power of their menstrual cycle to tune into what their body needs and to work with their body instead of against it. She is passionate about guiding women in the transformation from enduring their menstrual cycles to using that cyclical rhythm to nurture themselves and connect to their inner wisdom and guidance. Her clients track their menstrual cycle and use that information to make more confident choices about their health and to get more done in their business and nourish themselves first. Welcome, Tara. I'm so glad you're with me today.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. I appreciate you having me come on.
Yeah, me too. So a little bit of background on this. So Tara and I have had a lot of conversations. I'm a huge fan of both her and the work that she's doing. So a little background on why I'm excited about this is that you know how much I'm always trying to work with your body instead of against it. That's all. That's why I love Tara. That's why I was like, oh, we are going to be friends. Because I personally have charted my cycle for about 20 years, from about the age of 30 until 50. So initially I did it to prevent pregnancy.
Yep.
And in the meantime, I discovered what an amazing tool it was and the valuable insight that it actually gave me about my body. So I just kept doing it. And eventually I used it to get pregnant 3 times. I actually have this. I told Tara that I'd have. This is my chart from when I was pregnant with Rowan, my oldest. I have all of my charts that I did on paper, and I can look back at them.
Those are the exact same charts I used to get pregnant too.
Yep.
We used the same book.
I watched myself have a miscarriage when I thought, I think I'm having a miscarriage. I took my temperature and I looked and I was like, oh yeah, there's nothing that's going to be done here. This is a goner. We're done here. And then I watched my period just very ungracefully disappear from my life using this. So it just, instead of being this helpless victim of, oh, my cycle, everything's just horrible. You use it like a superpower, or at least I can anticipate. So I just so excited for this conversation. I want you to tune in and hear everything Tara has to say. Yeah. So here's my main questions, and then there's no end. We're going to finish in an hour, but I know I'll have more than an hour of things I want to get from you. But, it seems like, okay, no, we're going to do that later. I'm going to put a pin in that. 3 things. Tell me how you got into this. How do you become a menstrual health coach?
Well, really, I got into it the same way you did. I was tracking my cycle to get pregnant. And so when I was about 30, we decided to get pregnant, try and get pregnant. And then it didn't happen. And so I found the book. A friend actually recommended the book, Taking Charge of Your Fertility, which is still one of my favorite books of all time about menstrual tracking.
Yeah.
So I took my temperature. I checked my cervical fluid, like all of the things I was doing for getting pregnant. And it actually took us 2.5 years to get pregnant. And so it was a long journey for us. But what it really gave me and what it really taught me was I knew my body really well. I knew what my body was doing. I knew that my second half of my cycle was not quite always long enough, and my progesterone was not really robust. I didn't get a big temperature shift. So I knew my body really well. And when we went into reproductive medicine, we had tried intrauterine insemination a couple of times, and it was our last go at that before we went to IVF. And I was able to advocate for myself in that reproductive medicine world, which is very clinical and very like, we're going to do it our way. They have their set procedures, which I understand, but it also leaves out what we as women know intuitively about our own bodies. And so in that situation, I was able to advocate for myself. And so I think one of the most beautiful things about tracking your cycle is you know yourself, you know your cycle, because I always believe we're the experts on ourselves. But you have data to back it up, and you can take that to your clinician, practitioner, whoever you're working with, and be like, this is what I know. And it's just such a belief that you have in yourself. And so that's what's really powerful. So I had two pregnancies pretty close together. My two kiddos are 18 months apart. So I got pregnant again when my oldest was 9 months. So whirlwind of pregnancy and breastfeeding for several years. And so my health was not really great. And I went and I found a health coach, and I worked through health coaching for myself, a program for myself. Mm-hmm. And I realized, I was like, this is what I really wanted while I was trying to get pregnant, because I knew and I believed that my body could do more. I just needed support. And so I was like piecemealing it together, trying to find all the things. I had a great acupuncturist who helped, but I was still doing a lot of it on my own. And so I went to health coaching school, and that was when I decided to do fertility coaching. Since then, it has expanded. And so I do fertility coaching, and I love that aspect of my work. And I also just teach women how to track their cycle, understand their cycle, really know themselves so much better. And that piece of not enduring our menstrual cycle anymore. There's a lot of shame and guilt that gets kind of put on us. Mm-hmm. And we just don't understand because we're never taught. You know, for most of us, our first period experience is, you know, shocking, scary, all of those things. And we may not have had conversations with our family members. Our information from school might have been like, well, here you're going to bleed and here's a pad, you know, and not any more expansive. Like, culturally, all we really talk about is our PMS and our periods, like the things that are not super comfortable. And then all of the story that we tell ourselves in these situations gets wrapped up in this negativity, that it's painful, that it hurts, that it's messy, that it's, you know, that I can't do things. All of that is the story we tell ourselves, but we're only looking at such a small portion of the cycle. And when you look at the whole menstrual cycle through the whole month, there's so many different things that are happening. And there's so many beautiful shifts and changes that when you understand your body, when you understand what it's telling you, you can really take care of yourself. And as you were talking about before, you can plan ahead. You can think about, oh, this feels really easy to me right now. And this feels really good. Like, what days of my cycle is this? So that you can then plan ahead and be like, oh, this is what, you know, I can take advantage of that. I can leverage my hormones. Mm-hmm. I can leverage my cycle, which I think is a really beautiful aspect of this, besides just that tuning in and connecting, because we have had that disconnection from our bodies because we've thought it's painful, it's terrible, it's shameful. So that reconnection to ourselves and that reconnection to our power and our power to create new life, because that's a really powerful thing that we just don't even think about.
Right. And, you know, as you were talking about that, saying that all we ever talk about is PMS and our periods. And you know, those images you see of those icebergs, they're typically, you know, like we're talking about what you see about a business person, you see the tip of the iceberg and you don't see all this work. When I think about tracking our cycles and learning more about that, you know, all we see is that tip, you know, our periods and PMS and pads and tampons or whatever. And then under the sea is where all the complexity is, and that's where all the interesting stuff is.
Yeah. And there's so much going on, because what we don't realize is that every day our hormones are shifting and changing just a little bit. And so we may feel different every day. And we live in a society and a culture in which we get up, we go to work, we do our work, we come home, we go to bed, we get up, we go to work. It's like wash, rinse, repeat is the way that patriarchal system around us wants us to function. And our bodies don't function that way. We function over this longer period of time. You know, we have that shift. We have that. Our energy grows, our energy gets big, our energy gets low again, but it happens over 30 days. So it's not happening in this tiny little microcosm of one day. And so we can feel like, you know, we get angry at ourselves because our body's not doing what it's supposed to do. It won't do what we want it to do. And we're just fighting all the time to get things done. And so I think one of the most powerful things about tracking and learning your cycle is that grace that you give yourself when you understand that you're not the same every day. And when you tune in and connect to what you need, it's such a huge, valuable piece of just nurturing yourself.
Right. So two things of that. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know that, you know, when you're doing these conversations, you're like, I need a little pin, actual physical pin to put in there. I'm going to come back to the nourishing yourself at those times. Mm-hmm. But I know, like, you know, this you use that patriarchal term that, every day the same, rinse, repeat, because men operate on an almost purely circadian cycle.
Yes.
Our cortisol levels, our can do, get up and get things done, that's a circadian cycle. Testosterone is very much on a circadian cycle.
Yep.
Men just need to get to bed on time so they can make all the testosterone and then get up early and then like cortisol and testosterone and bring it, rinse, repeat. That really works for them. But women, we have that, but we then have this overlapping infradian, like it's called an infradian rhythm that goes, 30-ish days.
Yeah.
And then, so I just rewatched it this morning on the rowing machine. You're nourishing with the cycles. You have that video, that's free video of kind of taking us through the seasons of our cycle. You compare our different stages of our menstrual cycle to different seasons, and then what our bodies, what we're naturally usually tend towards, like what we're good at, what's not so good, different ways of eating, and acknowledging our physical and emotional needs during those times. And I love that of yours. So how do you incorporate that into your one-on-one coaching? How do you coach people into, once they go from tracking to applying it?
So there's a couple different ways that I coach people. I do have a small group program called Tracking with Friends that we use. And that is just a really intense, like for people who haven't tracked before, this is how we get in. We meet on Marco Polo every single day and we check in with each other. And then we have group meetings, about 5 group meetings over the course of a 30-day period where we get to know each other and we brainstorm and we learn about our cycles, not just our own, but everyone else in the group. And so we talk about those things as they come up in real time. Like if someone's ovulating and is full of energy, like how do I support this energy? And how do I deal with when that estrogen goes away? How do, I might feel like crampy. How do I nurture myself in those situations? So I have a group setting where we do that. And I also do individual coaching. And so once we get into individual coaching, we really can dig in. So once we start to track the cycle, and I do 3 and 6 month coaching programs. So we have the time to figure out the patterns. So tracking with friends is like a one snapshot of one cycle, which is
so it teaches people how to do this.
Yes. Not as intensely as that, because we don't do temperature unless they want to. I mean, if you want to do temperature, I can totally do that. But it's that way of connecting in and creating that habit of checking in with yourself. And it gives you a really good baseline of this is what I feel like different during those different seasons of my cycle.
I see.
And then you can either continue on tracking with yourself, and I will have given you things like, hey, watch out for this because this might be a trend. Hey, look at this and see if this is a pattern in your cycle. Right. When we get into one-on-one coaching, we can really dig into what are those trends, what are those patterns, and how do we support your body with food, with movement, with sleep, with all of the different tools that we have that will keep you in your flow so that you don't have maybe PMS. That I have women who they don't really have cramping anymore. Their hormonal headache right before their cycle went away. They don't have breast tenderness anymore.
Hormonal headache going away.
It is possible.
Just by figuring out what you need at certain times.
Yeah. By supporting your hormonal, giving your body the nutrients, the movement, the sleep it needs to produce the hormones, and also supporting your detox processes to get all of the extra estrogens, hormones, your liver. We talk about that a lot because it's important that you not only produce the hormones, but you have to get them out too. So that's gut health. How are you absorbing nutrients? How's your body using them? How is your liver being supported so that you can break them down? Are you having bowel movements every day because you got to get rid of all of the hormones as well? So there's a lot that goes into it, and the one-on-one coaching, we can really dive into what exactly is going on for your body over that longer period of time, because then we get to make some shifts and see what it does. Because it can take 3 to 6 months for shifts to happen
Really
in
can.
our hormonal cycle. And, one of the cool things, I'm going to totally nerd out for a minute. And I know you'll appreciate this, Karen. So the eggs that get recruited to be ovulated, that recruitment starts like 3 months ago. Like if I ovulated today, the egg that I ovulated today would have started maturing 3 months ago. And so that's why there's kind of that, I don't want to say lag time, but there's that fluidity of it, because the egg we ovulate this cycle will have been developing.
I see.
Lots of them get recruited. So
it will have been bathed in last month's whatever
the
you
last
were doing.
3 months stress, the last 3 months nutrients, the last 3 months sleep. And so that's why it can take some time to shift.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So think of all the other hormones, because hormones don't work by themselves, right? All of these sex hormones that create our cycle don't work by themselves. They influence our cortisol, and our cortisol influences them. Our insulin, they go back and forth with insulin. They go back and forth with our mood hormones and our serotonin, and, all of those things, they work together, and hormonal systems really want to stay in this kind of steady fluctuating state. So if one kind of goes off on a tangent, the others are going to be like, wait, I'm going to switch so I can fix that, and so they go to help, but then they get off balance as well. And so that's where we get the symptoms that may look like one thing, but they're actually another thing, because the hormones are doing lots of compensation.
They're trying to help you.
They're trying to help. They really are.
So that's really interesting, because after I realized, I could prevent pregnancy this way or get pregnant that way. But once that was established, I realized this is like super biohacking. This was biohacking before biohacking became a thing.
Yeah.
And when I was trying new things,
I was trying to let my cat out. Oh, she made it.
Go. We have cat allowances.
No. She made it out. I didn't know how hard she'd have to.
I have all these little banners for when my dog goes ballistic when the mail comes, and my roosters are going to go off, and cats and. Don't get distracted. What was my question? My question
biohacking.
was biohacking. Oh yeah. So whenever I wanted to try out, I want to see if taking a gram of EPA and DHA, the omega-3s, want to see if that helps my cycle, my mood, my health. Because if I'm going to use supplements or try something, I want to try it and I want to see if it works. And if it doesn't work, I'll get rid of it. If it, does work, then I'll keep it. And what I would do is I would always start them on day 1 of a cycle. But I would write in my thing, started this. And I think not in this one, because I was doing pregnancy achievement, but you'll see in my notes of other ones what I was trying. I'm using these supplements, I'm fasting, and I'll do it for at least a cycle. But usually I would do it for a few cycles. If I would have known that, I would have always done it for 3 cycles. I would have quarterly experiments.
Yeah.
And then I could see, because that's, we talk about women not being involved in like scientific research studies sometimes. But there's a good reason we're not involved in scientific studies. I'm not saying we shouldn't be, but it's because there's so much other stuff going on that you have to take into account, and you have to look at a woman's response over her cycle, probably over 3 months of her cycle.
Yeah. And they can't account for our hormonal shifts, because that becomes an extra variable. They can't. And so that's why women's, most medicines are tested on men, and there's not a lot of research. There's getting to be more, which I'm very thankful for. And there needs to be even more, because it's half of the population, and, most of us have cycles,
Right.
So we need to know what that medication is going to do during the time when we have higher estrogen. What does it do during the time when we have higher progesterone? What happens to our bodies during that, because we are not steady state. And I understand, I have enough science background to know that is a really hard variable to account for. Also because each woman is going to have different responses and different levels. And, so it's a really hard thing to account for. And I think there's brilliant people in the world that can figure it out.
We can do hard things. We can do hard things.
Yeah. And especially now with like algorithms and things like that, there should be a way to tease out the information and the data that you're getting. And there's so many ways to biohack now that you can pull pieces out and account for those shifts. I think there's ways to do that.
We can do that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm going to let someone else do the statistics, but it can be done. I have faith in those people who like statistics.
Right. It can be done. Right. So people working with you, you're tracking with friends. The first stage is just tracking, learning how to check in with yourself once a day.
Yeah. Yep.
Recognizing those patterns. Like I remember one of my first patterns that I remember vividly seeing on my chart. I was like, I have a sore throat right before I ovulate every month. That was one of the first things I noticed, that I had a sore throat, that was really interesting. It's almost like I was doing too much and I needed to like rest just a little bit more. And I discovered those were kind of the little clues that I noticed. I noticed that during week 1, I was a shockingly good test taker.
Interesting.
And I actually scheduled, because I had an extremely regular cycle, which made this all the more exciting to do. And I remember scheduling a graduate record, like an entrance exam, like for like I'm literally day 3 of my period.
Wow, really
like by
early.
day 3 to 6 was like really good for me. Like after I got over the hump, like my PMS was like always rocky, like really emotional, mentally. That was very predictably difficult. And then I was tired that first day 1 through 3. And you talk about this in that nourished flow. And I found that I felt so much better if I just took that day. It just took that day. I'm like, Epsom salt bath. If I just took a bath, like I started going into work late on that day because I had some flexibility when I was doing this. And I would just take that long Epsom salt bath and eat and have tea. And I would get out. I'm like, oh, I can do this now. I just needed to like downshift for a while. If I pushed through, it seemed like the whole week was hard. But if I had the flexibility to back up, and that's where the tracking comes in, is realizing that. But yeah, by day 3 through 6, I realized I actually had really good focus. And then I would schedule my exams during that time.
I love that. Yeah. One of the women who I worked with, she had a lot of pain, and it was in her hip, and she would notice that it was cyclical, but didn't really know what it was. And we found, she was working with me in a 6-month program. And we found over the course of our work together that it was days 8 through 10. It was incredibly predictable. It was at that rise of estrogen. There was a certain point where her estrogen rose, because she wasn't quite at ovulation yet. So estrogen was going to go higher, but whatever was happening in her body during that time frame, it was really predictable. And she worked, she did exercise classes and taught exercise classes. And so she knew that during that time frame, she would be able to, if it was a lot, maybe she could trade a class. If it was manageable, then she could, make sure she took an Epsom salt bath and make sure she was taking, eating the foods that are going to help get that estrogen out of her body and help her body process things. And so there was things that we did, made sure she got really good sleep in that time frame, so that those, because we can't schedule our life around our cycle always. Like, I love the fact that you could take that knowledge of your like test taking and be like, I'm going to schedule that. And there's certain times we can do that, but then there's certain times where life happens and we just have to move through that space. But knowing what's really nurturing for you, whether it's a bath or tea or giving yourself space on either time of that big event that you can't reschedule, then you're not fighting with yourself. And it's really powerful.
That is, because it's amazing how much energy you expend just being pissed at yourself or thinking, why can't I, all these years, why can't I, I'm so this, fill in the blank.
Right.
That there's a shame layer, a judgment layer, or something is very energetically expensive.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah, it is. It's that fighting with yourself. And then, before you understand these pieces about yourself and not knowing why, what, yesterday or 2 days ago, this task, like, writing is one of the things that's really influenced by our hormones or can be supported by our hormones. Like, why can I write this thing 2 days ago and now I just can't focus or can't write, or the ideas don't flow? And so, but learning that about your process. There was a woman in tracking who was an author, and she was like, sometimes I can just blow my word count out of the water, and then there's other weeks I can't. But she then knew that about herself after tracking with me. So she would move with that flow. And on those days that it wasn't as fluid to do all of the writing, she could give herself grace because she knew there was other days that it was just going to be so much more, and that she'd be able to do so much more of it.
And
yeah.
So would you mind taking us through a little bit of those seasons?
Yeah. So the inner seasons are my mentors from Red School. They're the authors who wrote the book Wild Power. And so that's where the terminology about inner seasons comes from. And so, but it corresponds to what our hormones are doing as well. So there's a hormonal base to it, and then there's this more energetic seasonal base to it. So our inner winter is our time during our period. So when we're bleeding. And so that's a time that we may be have a little less energy. We might be more internally focused. And so during this time, actually, because our hormones are really low, the right and left side of our brain talk to each other really well. So it's a good time to kind of evaluate and tune into your inner wisdom and figure out and set intentions for what you want to do in the rest of the month. And so after your bleed, you move into your inner spring, which would be that time, the follicular phase, when your egg is starting to mature and your estrogen is starting to rise. Yeah. So thinking about it as springtime and early in springtime. So when you're closer to your period just being done, thinking about those tiny little shoots that are coming up. You don't want to blast them with full August sun. You want to think about, how do I nurture those little shoots and give them space? And so not moving too quickly. That's one of the things I notice in all of my programs is women who they get the concept of giving themselves rest during their bleed. And they're like, oh, okay, I can do that. But then as soon as they feel that energy coming up, starting to that springtime, they're like, whoo, out of the gate, I feel bad for not getting anything done. I'm going to go get all the things done. And then before they reach their peak of energy, which would be inner summer around ovulation, they're exhausted.
They use up their awesome.
They use up all of it before they get there. And so it's a matter of, I think I love the seasons because it gives you that concept of, you got to move slowly as you move out of that. Because again, if your focus is really internal and your focus that, then you're going to slowly be moving your focus outward and having more energy outward in the world as you get to ovulation. So ovulation is like summertime, your inner summer. So being really social, being out in the world, being your full self everywhere, and just being, your confidence increases, and all of those pieces come into play at your inner summertime. And then after ovulation, moving into inner autumn. So thinking about the early part of autumn, there's still like those really nice days but they have crisp mornings and cool evenings, but you're still kind of have that summer vibe and energy. So that's the first week of that inner autumn time, or our luteal phase. And then as you move to the second week, thinking about late autumn, and that you're bringing in the harvest and you're getting ready for winter and you're storing things away and prepping things. And so that second week, which we think of as PMS, noticing what's coming up for us, first of all, but also thinking about, how do I set support systems in place for myself so that when I get to my inner winter, I really can step back. I really can turn that focus more inward, because after summertime, our focus starts to become more inward. How do I shift and move that? But how do I have the support systems in place so that I can do that?
Right. It occurs to me that, when I'm hearing you talk about that, to be able to trust that, like, if you don't have the words to write at that moment, to trust that will come again. And that there's kind of like, there's times for creating and there's times for I think in your video, which I was rewatching today, you're like, and there's a time for doing KonMariing your closet.
Yep. Yeah. So that's like the early autumn, like right after you ovulate, when your estrogen has gone down, but your progesterone has come up, because progesterone is our nesting hormone.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can take advantage of that and clean out the closet or the pantry, or do real detailed work, like fill in all the details. And so doing like accounting, or, those tasks that take a lot of detailed focus, that's a really good time to take care of those pieces. Whereas the inner springtime is like, it's kind of dreamy and coming up with new ideas and
scheduling all your content planning time.
Yeah, planning time, or even creation time, because that's one of the times that writing flows really fluidly. So if you have a lot of content creation, that can be a great time to just kind of breeze through a lot of that.
I just think this makes it sound so much more fun.
Well, I think life can be a lot more fun. And I think when we know that our bodies do these amazing things throughout the rest of the month, that there's not just the really hard week of PMS that we have, or that we're bleeding and we don't feel good. Like, if we talk about all of those other pieces in our lives, then it changes your perspective on the whole thing.
It gives it meaning, it gives it meaning.
Yeah. And also knowing that, PMS is really common. It seems like everyone talks about, the period pain or whatever it is, but it's not really normal. Like, we can do a lot of supportive things to decrease period pain, to decrease cramping, or, I've had women who their headaches are gone and things like that. It's just, finding ways to support yourself and understanding what's going on in your own body. And that's what I love about tracking, is you learn what's true for you. So what's true for me on day 3 is not that I would want to be taking a test. So I know that about myself. But maybe day 7, that might be an okay day for me to do that. Normally when I schedule these things like lives or podcast recordings and things like that, I try and do it around my time of ovulation, because I know that my words flow more smoothly, that, it's just that conversation flows more easily, because we're open, but we're also very receptive. And that's just part of that hormonal support that we have during that time. And we can take advantage of it.
Oh, yeah. I remember, for as long as I was tracking and learning this, is that sort of 3 to 5 days before my period, serotonin is down, your progesterone's down, serotonin levels are down, everything's down. I couldn't get words out, even socially, especially socially. I was the awkward queen, and I'm an extrovert. I like talking. I do these interviews for fun because I get to talk with people. And I'm not cycling anymore, so I can do this every day if I want to. But yeah, before my period, I everything was awkward. I could just, and it was great to just know that even if I had to do something during that time, I knew I had to pull something from the introvert playbook. I had to bring a friend. I actually wrote notes about like conversation starters. I don't need conversation starters. I just talk to people. But that's when I actually learned, how do introverts interact in the world? And I remember writing notes about, here's something to ask. Here's something in the news that I could make a funny comment. Here's a joke. I can't joke before my period. This like leaves my brain.
Right.
But I would take notes so that I could actually be a person with social skills.
Yeah. And those are those support systems that you can put in place for yourself, because then those kind of, then going to a social event during those 2 or 3 days before your period, you felt more ease in that situation, right? You didn't feel like you were stumbling, trying to pull words, not knowing what to say. It felt easier because you had put in that support system that you figured out, like, oh, if I do this, I can do this so much easier. Yeah. And
for those of you listening, for anybody like me, if when I first heard this kind of thing, I was contemplating, I thought, think of all that productivity I'm going to lose, because I'm just a productivity junkie. I want to just go, all the things all the time. That's just how I am. And so if I think I have to shut it down for a day or two, I'm going to miss out. I have major FOMO. But when you look, like years ago, Good Morning America even featured it, the U.S. women's soccer team,
Yeah.
Megan Rapinoe. I mean, these are people who actually crushed it. Yet they took down days, because we know in performance athletics, there is no such thing as overtraining. There's only under recovery.
Mm-hmm.
It's about getting the sleep at the right time, getting the food at the right, and getting enough of it. And then you can come back. And so these are women who actually are at the peak of their physical performance, increasing their performance by resting at the right times and then choosing the right times to bring it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's important.
Yeah. And it's really powerful. I mean, we, in these busy, we feel like we're always too busy. Like, how can I take time out during, how can I rest? But our body really responds to small incremental changes. So even little changes. I had someone who heard me speak a couple of years ago, and the one thing she took away was rest during her period, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so she came back to me like a month later, 6 weeks later. She's like, so I just took 15 minutes the first 3 days of my cycle, and I just rested those three times, and I got so much done the whole month. Like, it shifted her entire month to just
weird.
15 minutes a day. It wasn't like she was adding in 3 hours or something. That would be wonderful. And once you know that what you need, you may be able to create more space in your time and really step away. But even that 15 minutes, even, 10 minutes sitting, enjoying your coffee or your tea in the morning by yourself on those days that your body needs a little more rest. Planning in 15 or 20 minutes before or after something that you have to be on stage or something like that, even when it's not matching where your hormonal support is at that moment, giving yourself the rest on either side of that can be incredibly helpful for just keeping you moving through the flow of your cycle.
I concur. My experience tells me the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now I want to ask some specific things
Okay.
if you've had experience with this, working with, and see what you, I've got a list. What's our time? Oh, geez, I got to hurry. Have we been talking this whole time? Heavy bleeding. I know so many women who are flutters. They have a lot of estrogen. I know it's associated with estrogen dominance, sometimes fibroids. Do people who are really heavy bleeders find that this can be helpful for them?
It can be, yes, because there's a couple experiences I've had with this. Sometimes women who bleed a lot need to support their body with more iron-rich foods after their bleed because they have bled so much. So understanding that your body might, in that inner springtime, your energy may not come up as quickly. I had one woman who had headaches pretty consistently, day 8, I think, 7. So, but once she added in some iron to that time frame, I think she took it all month long, but once she was adding that in, her headaches went away. And so hers, she found, was related to her bleed.
And we find that, just trained in nutrition, heavy bleeding, of course, causes a loss of iron, but low iron leads to heavy bleeding.
Right. That's how these things all work together. And then, the other piece of it is looking at where you may have extra estrogens in your life. Are they coming from your plastics? Are you getting a lot of food in plastic or storing food in plastic? Are you using a lot of products that have fragrance in them or different endocrine disruptors? So hormone disruptors in our self-care products, our cleaning products. And also, going back to, how is the liver being supported? Because there's 2 parts of our detox system in our liver. And the first part needs a lot of antioxidants and needs a lot of very specific nutrients. And the second part needs protein. And so to keep those systems, it also needs...
Stop. Detoxification needs protein.
Yes, it does.
People don't realize that.
Yeah, it really does. And so you have to have both pieces of it. The second phase of detox, needs the protein and some antioxidants, but primarily those protein factors are what's helping move that along. If your second phase gets backed up, then you've got all of these phase one things that have been processed, and they're actually more toxic than the first stuff that went in. And so you really need phase two to be working to get all of that through your system. And then you also need to be having bowel movements every day.
Phase
so
three.
You are getting it
Poop.
at 3. Yes. So you've got to get it out of your body, because if you don't, there are certain bacteria in your colon that will pull those estrogens back into your system again. So you got to get them out.
Pooping. Tell me, do you recommend using castor oil packs to your clients? Is that something that you incorporate into your?
I do sometimes. I used them when I was trying to get pregnant. And so I do think it's something that can be helpful. So I don't use them a lot specifically. And I saw you posted about the one that you've been doing, and I would like to do it, use one for my liver too, and see what kind of an impact it makes. Previously I had used them over my uterus and over my lower abdomen when I was trying to get pregnant. So yeah, I would like to do that kind of experiment for myself to see what kind of shift that makes for me.
Yeah.
So.
Polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah. So, for a long time, PCOS, everyone thought it was just like extra little cysts on your ovaries. And so that was the diagnostic standard, was taking an ultrasound and seeing if you had those cysts. What they're noticing now is that there is an inflammatory piece to it, and there's also a blood sugar regulation piece to it. And so there's 3 criteria actually for diagnosing it. And so, when your cycles are irregular, and when you have these longer cycles and things like that, it's important to really think about, how are you supporting your body with food? Are you very sensitive to insulin ups and downs? Because as we talked about before, estrogen especially is influenced by insulin. And so estrogen and insulin work together, but when one goes up, the other goes up. And so you have to keep, think about how they work together. And so, so blood sugar regulation, also inflammation, which part of that is, keeping your liver and keeping that all moving, but also just what inflammatory factors are there in your body? What other inflammation is there in your body? How is your gut health? Are you, getting foods through your gut lining that really shouldn't be there, that are causing more inflammation in your body? And so it's more of a complex, multi-system syndrome than they used to previously think about it. And so looking at all of those different pieces can be really helpful in helping and supporting that.
Right. Because I know we talk to a lot of people who will be listening. You and I have been talking some about progesterone in kind of the opposite way most people do. Most people want to increase their progesterone levels because when it's low, there's anxiety, there's tension, and things like that. And I know that tracking your cycles can help that. But both of us have worked now and then with people who have something called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome with hypermobility. And people with Ehlers-Danlos with hypermobility find that when their progesterone levels are high, that tends to cause more ligament laxity. And so for those of you who've been pregnant and you remember that, oh yeah, I remember when my ligaments were really lax when I was pregnant, to allow the pelvis to open up naturally, and nursing, sometimes exercising too soon can cause injury, and and you and I have talked about before, like, how are ways, usually we're trying to increase progesterone. We don't want to actually reduce it. But then do you have extra?
Go ahead.
I was going to ask if you had extra thoughts, but one thing we had talked about was just the benefit of tracking, because then women who have hypermobile EDS actually know when their progesterone is going to be high. They can predict when they have more laxity. And so they can give themselves, kind of going back to this whole point, when you need more supports, and then you can give yourself those physical supports at that time.
Yeah, that was the piece I was going to say, because, we don't really want less estrogen. and the other piece to that is we want estrogen progesterone was what we're talking about. We don't really want to lessen it, because it has so many amazing benefits, and it's part of yeah, it's part of so many things, but we want to make sure that our estrogen and progesterone are in a ratio of, I think it's about 2 to 1. So you want progesterone higher than estrogen in that second half of your cycle. So noticing what happens, and really the tracking is about understanding what's true for you. And so that's why I love tracking so much, because, some women have more laxity than others at certain times. Some of them, it doesn't impact them as much. And so creating those, knowing when their body is going to need those extra supports or need extra rest during those times is a really powerful, beneficial piece to, because again, all of the hormones interact with one another, and there is that effect of our hormones on our joints and things like that. So, because hormones don't work in isolation. They're not just circulating around your uterus. They're in your bloodstream, right? That's why when people say, even the IUD hormones, they're talking about, well, it's only localized. I'm like, well, there might be a higher concentration in that space, but once it's in your bloodstream is not local. So just understanding that there are whole body effects to things, and that the hormones interact with each other.
So I know most of the time you're working with adults, but you have a new program called Tracking with Teens, which I think is so cool. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. So Tracking with Teens is actually a program that I created, and because so many moms had been, and so many women I worked with were like, why didn't I know this sooner? Like, why did no one teach me this? I wish I'd known this sooner. So I created a program to have teens come through and understand and learn how to track. And so I tried to run it live, and then realized that teens' schedules are really, really a lot and overscheduled. So I have transitioned it into an online program that parents and teens, caregivers and teens can take together, either watching the videos together or watching them separately, and being able to discuss that. But we go through each of those phases of the cycle, and teaching teens how to track their cycle, how to understand what's going on, and really a lot of it relating it to the seasons. And so teens who maybe haven't started yet, but we can talk about, okay, so in springtime, what kind of activities do you like to do? How energetic are you? And then we can relate that to the parts of the cycle. Yeah. And so they start to have that understanding. They start to have that language. They know that their hormones are going to shift and change and not be the same every day. So it's 6 modules, and they can go through them. The first module has, like, I think it's 45 minutes of video, but the others are more like 20 minutes of video that you can go through. And what I love about it is it gives caregivers and teens conversation starter. It really gives them a way, kind of a shorthand, because, you can go to your teen, like for you, if you're still cycling, and say, I am day 26 today. And your teen will be like, oh, I should probably be right?
Back away slowly.
Your teen can then come to you and say, I'm day 26, and you can be supportive of them.
Advocating for your own body's needs. Oh my gosh.
Yes, exactly. So really advocating for yourself, and really just having that communication and understanding of what's going on in your own body. And as far as, teens with cycling too, that you may start your bleeding at 12 or 13 or whatever it is, but the process of that information, that tract that goes from your brain to your ovaries, there's a feedback system, right? From your brain to your ovaries, back to your brain to your ovaries, that creates that cycle. It can take 7 years, so into our early 20s, before that pattern is really laid down with our brain and our ovaries and back to our brain and things like that. So it can help you make really conscious choices about birth control options for yourself during that time frame. And so just understanding what's true for you. And then just that communication piece between caregivers and teens, I think, is a huge, valuable piece to be able to start the conversation, to have somebody else talking about it. So then you can be like, but she said this. And then just understanding your bodies sooner, I think, is a really powerful thing.
It is. And I was talking to my daughter about it. She's 15. And she asked, is it live? And I said, no, it's just an online class. And she just said, that is so important, because teens actually interacting live with someone and talking about this would just be a non-starter. To be able to access this in the privacy of your room and just watch it on your phone so no one knows what you're watching. I think that's a really important, I think that's a really important feature.
Yeah. And then, included in the program is an hour coaching call with me. So you can take what you've learned and start to play with it, understand it, so the team can start to figure it out. And then when you have questions about, okay, how does this fit in my life? Then you can come and schedule that one-on-one with me and be able to be like, this is what I know about my body. How do I support my systems? Or this is going on. What does this mean? And we can start brainstorming. We can start talking about the trends and the patterns that you notice in your own cycle so that you can just be aware of them and then start looking at what's nourishing for you during those times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just love that. I mean, I know most of us as adults, like, oh, I wish I would have had this.
Right.
I didn't have to wait until I was miserable in my 30s I work with women all the time, and they, I've had a hysterectomy, which often is, thank goodness they've had a hysterectomy. They're miserable. But when I question back historically through their lives, I think, oh my gosh, there's so much we could have done, that some kind of estrogen dominance. They weren't clearing their estrogen out because of the liver. And to look at, maybe the xenoestrogens or to support their detoxification process would have saved them. I mean, the amount of life you lose trying to manage a difficult period, it's a big deal. It's a really big deal.
It is a really big deal. And like you talked about before, the emotional energy. So it's not just the physical pain and bleeding and all of those things. It's also the emotional, like, why is this happening to me? I have to go to work. I have to push through this. I can't miss another day of school. Like, all of the emotional toll that takes, and the societal pressure and shame that gets put on that. There's certain countries that have started having menstrual leave, which I think is amazing. Like, they give, I think it's 3 days a month of menstrual leave. And I think it's Spain, I want to say. Anyway, it's one of the European countries has created that as a law. And so, like, how wonderful and beautiful to be able to know that people around you acknowledge and understand, and that can be a piece of your life. And so until we can get there, though, how do we support ourselves and knowing and understanding and being able to nurture yourself so that you can have a different experience?
That's so cool. Yeah, that's my rooster. God. When I go live, they just sit on the back deck, and I have 3 right now, and I'm so ashamed of that. So the last thing I want to ask you about is you have a thing coming up. Breaking up with your period app.
I do.
Tell me about that.
Yeah. So there's, just with all of the shifts and changes that have been happening, with the Supreme Court rulings and things like that, we don't really know what that means for the privacy of our information. And so there's some of them that conglomerate the information and then sell it. There's some of it, we don't know how the courts might rule on privacy of our data that is out there in the world. And so for people who are concerned about that and really want to stop using a digital form of tracking, I have a paper tracker, and I'm going to teach you how to use that. And I'm going to teach you how to create the habit and the routine for yourself so that it sticks. And then also we're going to talk about, some of the things that women who have tracked with me have noticed. And so those trends and those pieces that, like, what are the really powerful pieces that you can, advocating for yourself with your practitioner, all of those different pieces that can come about from you tracking your information about your period and how you feel during your whole cycle. So that's happening next Wednesday, and it's a free 30-minute class. And then I'm going to stick around for a little while and do Q&A for people who want to do some Q&A afterwards. But
that's cool. That is really cool. And if people register, like if people are like, I'm busy, I can't make this, will this be recorded so they can get it?
Yeah, it will be recorded. You do have to register, though, so that I know to send it to you. So go ahead and register. And if you don't make it live,
I put it in the
I will
comments.
send it out.
I put the Eventbrite link in the comments for people watching this. And actually, I put a whole bunch of stuff in the comments. So if you've been watching this, I got all Tara all over the place here. I've got her link for tracking with teens. If you've got a teenage girl in your life, or a teenage bleeder in your life, then check that out and see if they would be interested in doing that. The Breaking Up with Your Period app next Wednesday. that link is in there. Tracking with Friends is in there. And I put that link because you know how, I mean, if you're like me, when Tara starts talking about the seasons of our menstrual cycle, and it gives you so much, just that piece gives so much meaning. That is the Nourished Flow webinar. And I asked her to add that to that because I have a recording of that I will watch every now and then. And I just think it's a powerful talk that she gives. And she also adds little bits about foods, like what kind of foods would nourish you during that time. That's why I have it. She actually gave it to me to use with some of my clients, which is wonderful. She's really generous. I encourage you, if you do nothing else, get that Nourish Flow webinar and watch it. I think you're going to really enjoy it. It's just going to go more in depth about what she talked about today. And then register for her Breaking Up With Your Period app if that's something that you're curious about. Yeah. Yay, all the Tara things.
Thank you.
So our hour's up. Our hour's up. I actually have more questions to ask you, but we'll do that some other time.
I would love to come back if you would like to have me. I love talking about this, and I want this information to be to as many people as possible. And so it's really important to me so that we all understand what's going on with our own bodies, what's going around with the bodies of people around us, and that we can give ourselves and everyone else around us some grace.
Yeah. Really embodying our bodies. I love it. Embodying our bodies. God. Yeah. Thank you, Tara, so much. Really great talking to you today.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thanks for joining us, you guys. Again, check the comments section for all the links so you know how to, you can follow Tara on Instagram and all the things. Check her out. All right. Bye.
Bye.